Hello and welcome to this week's episode. I'm Hugh McCarran.
I'm Ben Maloney.
I'm Faye Lenner.
I'm Atom Bergstrom.
So come take a seat with us on the Mockery cushion as we explore the myths, deceptions and misconceptions surrounding the current pandemic. Alright, so this week we are joined by Atom Bergstrom, and Atom is a health researcher and educator. He runs two websites, which are sunsyncnutrition.com and solartiming.com, which is all about chronobiotic nutrition. He has written over 40 ebooks, which are all available on solartiming.com. And has recently written multiple ebooks detailing his observations of the coronavirus pandemic. Alright, so how are you anyway, Atom?
I'm great. How are you
Good.
guys?
Good, yeah.
Yeah, not bad. Yeah, it was, I'm in Bradford, which is still in a lockdown. So
Mm.
We're
it's a bit-
locked down here too. Yeah.
Oh, you are? Okay, yeah.
Oh yeah. They're really serious about it. Now we kind of social distance anyway. We've become kind of hermits. We just go out to the farmers market once a week usually,
Yeah.
and once in a while have to make a trip to do some kind of legal thing or whatever, every
Yeah.
so often. So it hasn't affected us, but the poor people now with a heat wave here that have to go out with masks and work all day,
Yeah,
I feel sorry for them.
I know. Are masks, are they mandatory where you are if you're going to shops?
Yeah, they're
and things?
mandatory. Even on the street, if you're walking on a hiking trail.
Really?
Even on a Zoom meeting. Can you believe that?
Oh, I saw that. Yeah, I saw it
Maybe
was.
that's why. Hey, maybe that's why they were banning us or something. I never thought
Yeah.
of it.
Why is
Yes,
that?
I have no idea. The whole thing is crazy in the first place. My take is that this is just a simple virus, an RNA virus that came down the pike. It's not exosomes or anything like that, anything complicated. It's a cold that may be as bad as a flu, maybe a tiny bit. I suspect from the data I've seen that it's less of a killer than the regular flu epidemic that kills people. And isn't it interesting how you don't even hear about the flu now? It's like cured the flu.
I know.
Yeah.
Still, maybe an average of, I think, is it 500,000, 600,000 flu deaths every year, and it doesn't really
Something
get talked
like
about.
that. It's really up there. And, with all the other things and cancer, for instance, I've only known two personal friends who had coronavirus, and they were two of the first to get it in Oklahoma. And they told me they really got sick, but a vibrant gal here, my partner, a few years ago, she almost died from a flu. She stopped breathing in my arms when I was
Wow.
carrying her into the bathroom, and I started screaming. And after about 30 seconds, she suddenly said, "Why are you yelling?" and came to. And I had to take her. Fortunately, we were evacuated from the, you probably heard about the Thomas fire and the floods. 23 people were killed here, drowned by giant boulders coming down off the hillside and mud and everything, debris flow. But we were safe at a ranch at that time when it happened, but we were isolated. So we were basically stuck about 30 miles out in the wilderness with no help. And here I thought she was dying of the flu.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's awful.
So that's serious, but I only know two people, and I don't know a single person who has died of this yet in my lifetime. Everybody seems to, with a common cold, we apparently get it 5 to 7 times a year I have. But most people don't even know they have a cold. It just passes on through. And here it is. They're testing for who has it, not who has serious problems or dies from it.
Yeah.
And the comorbidities that are happening in nursing homes, I suspect it's the drugs, as do other people. Tylenol is responsible for half the liver deaths in the country, in the U.S. anyway. I don't know about other countries. Half the deaths, 25% of those are from, and this is Time Magazine I'm quoting before, 25% are but from just regular use of Tylenol, and 25% are suicide because it's the favorite method of suicide here in the U.S., Tylenol.
And that Tylenol is paracetamol, isn't it?
Yep,
The pain.
acetaminophen, and then ibuprofen is just as bad.
Yeah.
Regarding the virus, because you mentioned, Atom, the RNA and the SARS viruses and things. I was unaware until recently that there are other strains of coronavirus that have been around for years. So, what do you have any ideas about the origins of this particular strain of the virus?
If you take statistics, the best bet is through birds and pigs, because they co-evolve. The coronavirus co-evolved with birds about 75 million years ago. The conservative people say it was 10,000 years ago that they can prove. But back then they figured since the birds and pigs too evolved with it. Many of these viruses start with pigs. In fact, the Spanish flu actually probably started from our association with animals in Kansas City is one story. However, that virus could have been around since 1915 and worked its way to Kansas some other way, because apparently the Spanish flu was around for 3 or 4 years before it ever came. And viruses like coronaviruses migrate so quickly or change so quickly, they can transcribe in 3 minutes, and they usually only last about a week in their exact form. And there's actually a swine flu virus of that was loose just not too many years ago. It may be still out there, that mutates so quickly that if it went from one state to another state here in the U.S., you would have no antibodies for it, because it would be a totally different virus. So testing would be impossible. And that's one of the problems that makes COVID or coronaviruses hard to test. Many people don't have antibodies and have had it because it's a different variety. And many people don't have it and have had it. So they don't really know what the heck is going on. And I suspect this is something like St. Vitus's dance. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
St. Vitus's dance, when about 20 years ago, was supposed to be associated with ergot, which is the basic building block of LSD. Because in the Middle Ages, maybe thousands, maybe even millions of people started wildly dancing in the street until they would dance themselves to death. And it got blamed on ergot. And of course, the LSD people really supported it. But I've gone back in historic medical books, back as far as the 1870s. And they knew it was like a religious psychopathy. It was totally in their heads. And then now that seems to be the new theory, that they're sorry that they called chorea, which is when children start jerking around with crazy movements with that, and that it couldn't have been ergot, because ergot just puts you to sleep. You certainly don't dance. And they left out the parts of it as a worldwide occurrence that occurred in countries that didn't have any rye. And anyway, I think a lot of this, let me tell you a quick story. A yogi was sitting on the path in India, and a man came along that looked suspicious to him. So he said, "Who are you and what is your business?" "I'm going to the Kumbh Mela because the Lord of Death has told me I have to kill 1,000 people." And the yogi said, "Well, that sounds reasonable. Go about your karma." So he reads in the paper then, though, instead of 1,000 people died, 100,000 people died. And now he said, "This is unacceptable." So when the guy came back, he stopped him again. And he said, "I thought you said 1,000 people." He said, "That's all I took. The rest of them got scared to death." So I think a lot of COVID is in people's head, and it's been well known by people who have researched voodoo and shell shock, now called PTSD, that many people died from just fear. And I think a lot of that is in play with COVID-19.
Yeah, people downplay how serious emotional stress is on a person's health, don't they?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a story. I had a girlfriend, and we got the notice that her mother was dying in the hospital in San Diego. So early in the morning, in fact, the doctor said, you better come down because she's got 24 hours to live. So we went down to San Diego, met all of her relatives flying in from Kansas, and we all in troop went to the hospital. It was this lady all stuck with tubes in her, whining. And my girlfriend says, why don't you just unplug her? This is so uncruel. And I'm always one of those people raised against this good night. Don't accept such fate. So I was thinking it, and this old lady looks at me, starts staring at me. So I realized I was on camera, so to speak. And so I thought, what would a Donald Lay do? And he was my teacher. So I walked up to her, I took her frail little hands in my hands, and I said, repeat after me. I am a winner. And to my amazement, as well as the rest of the people, she yelled out, I am a winner, and didn't die. So they took her out of ER. Everybody went home, and they stuffed her away in the nursing home for 9 months. So then she finally passed away, probably of loneliness.
Wow.
To go figure.
That's crazy. It just shows the power of words, doesn't it? On a person.
Surprised the heck out of me.
Yeah.
And I've seen many cases similar to that, but that was the extreme.
Yeah, you talk about the whole, just the fear element of this pandemic. And I was looking at a study, like a CNC survey, I think it was 1,000 people in America, that showed the average person believed that 9% of the population had died from coronavirus, which is 30 million people, which is about 225 times higher than the actual percentage of death. So people are also overestimating the cases by a factor of 20 as well. And similarly in the UK, it was about 7% that people thought, when it's actually 100 times less than that.
You've got some good people on that coming out of England. Vernon Coleman and Dave Cullen are two good examples.
Yeah. I've been watching Dave Cullen. He's done some really good stuff.
Yeah. When it comes to masks, I really agree with those guys. They really know what's happening. It is a great reset. It's been going on. They've been controlling people, and they just keep on adding on.
Yeah.
In California alone, we have 800 plus new laws on the books every year.
That's crazy.
I'm sure you're in a similar situation.
Yeah. They just use the threat of the virus to justify all of these new rules.
I think it even surprised the people in the boardrooms. They thought this was going to go on until 2030, and then they were just amazed at how easily. I mean, people are genuinely afraid. You'll walk near them, and they'll jump out of the way, even into the street if you go near them. They're so afraid of it, which just is amazing to me.
Or if you see if someone sneezes, then everyone's just terrified.
Oh boy!
Yeah.
Well, I was actually on the tube a couple of weeks ago in London, and a woman sneezed, and everyone apart from about 2 people just got off at the next stop. It was just empty.
That doesn't surprise me. Amazing.
I've been reading recently about masks and what people don't realize are potential health conditions caused by the masks. So you can get dryness of the mouth and things. So there's no saliva killing off bacteria. Bacteria can build up. Dentists are now saying that appointments at the moment are relating to mask-related incidents. So people having receding gum lines and inflammation, tooth decay, even tonsillitis. They're calling it mask mouth, but this is something. This seems to be causing people serious problems.
I agree. I think it causes more problems than otherwise because first of all, your hands are touching it. when I went to the farmer's market, and we have to wear them, so I had mine on and the strap broke. So I have to be handling my cash and the mask at the same time, my wallet and everything, holding it and balancing it like this. And I'm sure money has all those germs on it and things like that. Normally, we get them all the time. But I'm actually touching my hands and my mouth to pay the bills. Plus, they put in lines. You have to go in one and out the other. Normally, to get to the parking lot, we just briefly walk past a few people. Now we have to walk through about 300 people to go around the sidewalk, walk an extra half a mile to get back to the car, and go through all those people.
All these one-way systems have just made it so much more convoluted and made the whole journey like twice as long than it should be.
Yeah, and people don't pay it.
California into a Rube Goldberg machine, if you remember seeing that machine.
Oh
yeah. But people, not. I mean, people aren't really distancing in the queues anyway. So I mean, this is making people just stand next to each other for much longer periods of time.
That's so true, yeah.
What was I going to say? I don't know. I can't remember where I was going with that.
Do you know, Ben, I think COVID causes forgetfulness. I think you might need to
that's what's happening.
That's what's happening. But I don't know if you've read much about the situation in the UK with hospitals, but they set up a load of emergency hospitals, the Nightingale hospitals on the NHS, which were pretty much have been empty since the beginning. They overestimated I think hospital beds actually 4 times emptier than they are normally. And the ambulance response times as well, people waiting 2 hours for an ambulance for a stroke or a heart attack. Whereas obviously the COVID ambulance response times are minutes,
I've heard that.
Yeah. It's something like, I think it says here in March, there were more than 6,000 patients waiting more than 2 hours for an ambulance.
Like they built all of these these hospitals, these emergency hospitals, and they did it in like countries all around the world. It almost seemed like they were all trying to outdo each other with who can build like the biggest hospital in the quickest time, and then they just don't get used in the end.
Many of them, the ones they are filled, they film them on the mainstream media to show. A lot of them are empty, and a lot of them are filled with people just coming in to get tests because they convince them to come in that they have to get the test. And of course, when you get the people together like they do, you get more COVID. So they're actually causing it by people coming in to get the test.
Yeah.
And I read that
the drugs they give them are the main problem is not many people are dying if they stay home. And I mean, stay home and go out in places, but they just don't go to the hospital. The hospitals are killing most of those people, in my estimation.
I mean, I read as well that the tests have trouble distinguishing between different RNA fragments, so it can't tell the difference between necessarily COVID-19 and other strands of the virus. And also, Hugh, you were saying about people testing positive after they'd already recovered.
Yeah, there's cases in Korea and in China where they'd already recovered from the virus and they were still testing positive. I don't know what that's all about.
I think I read something about the virus remaining in the nasal tracts, or traces of the virus remaining for a lot longer after recovery. So you could
also many of it never gets to the nose. It stays in the lungs, or it's in the nose and not in the lungs. So their tests don't. Even when the tests are accurate, if they were accurate, which they aren't, they often will miss it anyway because it is selective in where it goes. They can go to a different organ system or not be in the blood. I'm a big fan of Emmanuel Ribisi's work, and he shows that, say you measure for potassium. They measure in the blood. But where? What is the blood? They measure in the serum. Well, potassium if potassium is overloaded in the cell, it sucks it out of the blood. So when a person is deficient in potassium, they actually have too much because they don't know how to test the entire blood and the entire rest of the body.
Isn't that the same with like iron? And if you test your blood for iron, then it doesn't really tell you if you've got too much iron or not.
Yep. A typical cancer test, there's 68% more potassium in the cell, and on the outside, it doesn't measure. It measures low. So people would think cancer has to do with low potassium, so they must need more potassium. And actually, potassium feeds cancer in its growing stage and kills it in its spreading metastasis stage. So people don't take that into account. So Ravisi is the only one I've seen who ever bothered to take that into account. He lived to 101. He did pretty well.
Right, yeah. What, 101? That's really good.
101. He was still practicing the day he died. I talked to him on the phone when he was 100.
Wow.
Wow.
So we've had various sources in the news saying that there might be lots of different treatments, but I just wondered what your thoughts were on the use of hydroxychloroquine and vitamin D as proposed treatments.
Too many side effects. Even Wikipedia gets that right. I've seen the longest list of side effects I ever saw for a drug. Quinine, hydroxychloroquine, chloramine itself, they're all toxic. Now, if a person has malaria, outright malaria, yes, then it can work. But even then, it kills a lot of people down the line because it causes all kinds of damage. So all of these basically cause damage. But in many treatments, like if I was bitten by a rabid dog, I'd go get the vaccine for it. But I know that vaccines are going to have side effects. But do I want to die now or die 20 years later? You know, sometimes it comes down to a choice. With the flu, however, the flu is actually protecting us and cold viruses against certain things down the line. So we're actually building our immunity because they are measuring immunity as antibodies, and that's the emergency immunity. There are 4 levels of immunity. One takes a day. It's a poison type immunity. One takes a week. One takes 28 days. And one takes half a year. And the half a year one is the standard antibody they usually measure. In fact, fatty acids control acid and alkaline and immunity in the body. And that's, of course, where you get into omega-3 fatty acids versus saturated fats.
Yeah.
So I guess the best way really to protect against becoming more seriously ill from the virus is just to boost the immune system.
Educating the immune system. Because remember, who did the Spanish flu strike? People between 20 and 40. And they make a mystery out of it, but the same thing happened with the hantavirus. Remember? If you had an undeveloped immune system or a deteriorating immune system, you were immune to the cytokine storm that occurred. So you actually have to educate your immunity and go by what could be called, which Ravisi called guided chemotherapy. And now I'm not talking about the standard drugs they have. It's just that you know your catabolic or anabolic state and what you're in. That's why steroids work so well, and for the flu and other things. And a doctor in Texas noted that. Bernie Coleman noted that they used to treat these kind of things with steroids. What you want to do is just tone down the immunity to stop the cytokine storm from happening. And that's very easy with just simple steroids, they have side effects, but you don't die. And you only use the steroids for a limited amount of time, not like many people do for certain conditions where they get the moon face and all those symptoms that go with it.
What do you think of vitamin D? Because some people are saying that, like high dose vitamin D is a possible treatment, but I know there's a lot of debate actually. I think especially in the sort of the Ray Peat community as to whether you should supplement vitamin D and whether it's safe, because there's different forms and things.
I actually wrote a book about it. And,
right.
What was vitamin D called when it first was discovered? Toxoferol. Toxoferol. Think of the name. Now, that didn't work for marketing, so they had to change it. But the truth is that we can make vitamin D in our own body, and we can do it at the North Pole. Like, how did the Inuits get their vitamin D? Well, you say, well, they ate fish. Where did the fish get it? From the sun? They swam all the way down to the equator and came back at night so the Eskimos could eat it. Oh, but they ate the krill. And the krill did the same thing. Oh, they ate the seaweed. Oh, the seaweed went all the way down on the Jet Express to the equator, came back, and they got the vitamin D. Where did it come from? The truth is you can get vitamin D out of the air. You can get it. It's been well known. Back in New York, for instance, the Italian community used to hang their pasta on clotheslines. And they had to move into tenements that had multi-stories. So they hung them on the railings of their balconies. And they passed a law against it. Well, everybody started getting sick. And they realized that exposing the pasta to the sunlight was what the problem was. So all the Italians would buy their pasta now and have it shipped in from Italy where they knew better. And it's been known for a long time. It was first discovered that the property in sunlight that was anti-rickets was actually, you could put it into your food. And I'm really surprised at Ray Peat. With other vitamins, he says, take just a pinch, 15 milligrams at the most, and I wouldn't even recommend it because of all the things. But with vitamin D, take a whole bunch of it. Take 10,000, take 20,000. Yeah. When the textbooks clearly said if you take more than 400 IU of their product, as a pill, you lose bone mass. It's in all the textbooks, and suddenly, when they want to sell vitamin D, the whole thing changes, even into 2 levels of vitamin D, one for deficiency and one for sub-deficiency, or whatever they call it now, just to market the vitamin D.
Yeah.
When it's so easy, you just stick your fruit out the window. You can even do it in the shade, but you can't do it through glass. Like the windows you see here, not going to work because I don't get the correct frequency. Yeah. But vitamin D doesn't just absorb in one frequency. Like that's how they make it hit milk. They just submit it to radiation. It works in multiple frequencies. They just use one light, one frequency because it's the best. Similar to soybeans. Soybeans have 18 different cofactors that go in them. That actually feed them nitrogen. And when it came to the United States, they couldn't get it to grow. So they reduced it to 1, which made the biggest, fattest soybean. And it's nowhere like the Middle Eastern soybean, which wasn't estrogenic like ours is and the world soybean is now.
Yeah. They're heavily genetically modified, aren't they? So
very modified. It's been so much. It started being modified in 1888 when it first came over here. It was used, in car parts by Ford, and then also used to take the red out of red wheat. That was the purpose of it originally. Soy would take the red out of it, kill the vitamin D. Vitamin A. It took them 1937. They validated that worked on fish vitamin A too. The soy takes it right out.
Oh wow!
Destroys it. That's by the way, in Scientific American, if you go back into the old books, which I like to go back there, before they started marketing everything, scientists were really interested in research at that point and fascinated by it. So all that information is available back through about 1800s on through 1947, when the Truman administration decided to shut all that down. They had worldwide meetings. Ray Peat knows about this too. I found out about it accidentally because I researched so much. I've been in libraries from 7:30 in the morning till they kicked me out at 2:00, and I lived right next door to them. So I'd go in out for a half hour to eat my lunch, come out for a half hour to eat my dinner. And at the one in Fort Worth, they said, this guy doesn't have to sign in. He spends more time in here than any of my employees. So just let him through any time.
Yeah. Oh, So there was this article that was suggesting that that men start taking estrogen so apparently women are less vulnerable to the coronavirus, so men should take estrogen, which everyone thinks is like, I mean, first of all, it's kind of debatable whether it's actually a female hormone, which just
Strangely enough, it could actually stop a cytokine storm, but it would kill you by other means. So it's kind of like the operation was a success, but the patient died type of situation.
Right.
Estrogen isn't even a female hormone. Ray Peat has gone into that, and when I first heard that, I was fascinated by it. And indeed, it is not a female hormone. It only shows up for stress, whether it's in your arm or your womb or wherever. Pregnancy is a stress. It's supposed to be there for pregnancy or for preparation for pregnancy. So that's why women get 10 times more thyroid cancer than men do, because they have to deal with that. And because they don't tell them to get rid of it and eat foods that don't promote estrogen, like serotonin, nitric oxide, omega-3s, all the things they tell us are good. In fact, it's getting to the point where whatever you read in the medical community, or even the holistic community now, reverse it and do the opposite, and you'll live a lot longer.
It just shows how politicized everything is now, and how there's always an ulterior motive.
Is it the same in England like it is here? Like, I have people that their grandparents are outliving. I know people like one of my best friends. Her grandmother lived to 103. Her mother to maybe 80, 70. She left the planet at 50. And I have many cases of that. I know people who their grandmothers are alive when they die.
A woman in my granddad's care home, she just recovered from coronavirus. 90, I think she was mid-90s. So
that's amazing.
What does that say?
I know. It's a lifestyle. You know, I used to hang around with Gypsy Boots. Are you familiar with them?
No.
Gypsy Boots, look him up on the internet. This guy would jump up and down and jump around. When he was 90, he was still running marathon races. He would sleep on pin cushions, swing from trees. When the hippies were having their be-ins and the Monterey Pop Festival, he had to be there all the time. And he kept going and going. And he used to come into the health food store I managed, jump in and throw out Boots bars. And people thought he was crazy, because here's a 80 to 90-year-old man who could throw a football further than some professional players and had a six-pack of abs on it. And all he did, he didn't take any supplements at all. Well, he advertised Kyle and garlic because his brother-in-law was into it. Yeah. And when I met him, he had an 18-year-old girlfriend to boot.
Wow.
He certainly didn't act or look like a 80 or 90-year-old. You'll see him on, you can go on the video and find some YouTube videos of him.
Yeah,
he was personally, I wouldn't say a friend, but he was a regular person in my life who would show up at the health food store because his son went to school up here in Santa Barbara.
There's a lot of things that aren't advised for people's health now. And yet it seems like the sort of the last generation that's sort of just passed on, well, they actually got away with a lot of that, and they did really well. I mean,
you're just saying smoke a cigar every day or a glass of whiskey every day.
Everyone says don't smoke, but I mean, I'm not advocating smoking, but it's just interesting. You know, people now are following all of the advice, and they're not doing well at all.
We can't account for genetics by what they call vertical genetics completely. It's mostly horizontal. They first started investigating the elephant and realized an elephant is impossible because they only made every 2 years. There's no way it could develop. So then they started realizing that DNA is also transferred by many other things, and that, interesting enough, many women, if they've had prior lovers, they have actual genetic imprints of certain of those traits that were in the sperm of the male. Something to think about there. And that's been proven. It's called horizontal genetics, or horizontal, they have a better name for it. And it's a very real thing. Ray Peat spoke of it in one of his last interviews, by the way. And I've been aware of it for the last 20 years. Actually, I first discovered it in the 70s, again, going through those old medical books where they knew about such things back then.
Yeah, talking about so much of these actions taken against the virus to be politically motivated or a bit of a facade. And obviously, Atom, you mentioned New York City, something from there more recently. I don't know if you saw about Mayor de Blasio releasing 2,000 prisoners because he said that prisons were coronavirus hotspots, and therefore having less people in the prisons would reduce the spread of the virus. But obviously, as is expected, the shootings in New York City are up by, I think, 170 odd percent. Murders up by 23%. Burglary up as well. And I think I read that a 7-year-old girl was wounded. A young woman was murdered. There's a quote from him somewhere here that he said, "We now have fewer people in our jails than any time since World War II, and we are safer for it and better for it." When the truth is, half of them were, already been rearrested. He explained his justification was that this was all to lessen the burden on jails in an attempt to curb the spread of the virus. I mean, people making insane political moves.
Same here in California, the letting criminals out. Was it in Vibrant Gal? Was it in California where that person they let loose raped the former rape victim? Was that in California? Well, anyway, it was a case of someone let out of prison and for rape, and he went and got his former victim and raped her and killed her this time. And it's gotten so ridiculous here, letting people out of prisons, that they don't put people in for crimes that when I was a beatnik and a hippie, we would have gone to jail for life. Like, here's a typical item in the paper that I just read this week's paper. So-and-so, police found him with a needle stuck in his arm in a comatose situation. And he had methamphetamine, heroin, mollies, and I think mushrooms. And they cited him. They cited him?
That's crazy.
Normally, you would have been stuck away in jail for life or something like that with all those drugs on you, and you got a needle in your arm beside. And he just wasn't going. And that happens so much that many times I get amused by it. Of course, pot, it's funny. Pot is okay, but people are still taking meth and everything else. And at this point, they're not jailing them here in California. I don't know about other states. But meanwhile, if you have a mask and you're at the beach, they went and got some guy, he's about a quarter mile out on a paddleboard, and they dragged him out and arrested him. So,
yeah. In fact,
they need the room for the people not wearing masks.
I was interested to see a bit more what you thought about the masks, actually, because looking at just at European countries, so the UK has been, I guess, relatively strict about mask wearing in terms of, you have to wear them going into shops and all of this kind of thing. And obviously, so we've had, I think as of recently, 320,000 cases, 4,700 cases per million people. And then you have European countries like the Netherlands coming out and saying that they're not going to make masks compulsory and that they don't believe it makes any difference. And actually, they've had 3,700 per million cases. So, actually a significant amount less infections per population than the UK has. And obviously, Sweden going for kind of the herd immunity option rather than strict lockdown measures, having less deaths per population than the UK. So what difference does it make, I guess?
Usually the particles get through most of the barriers. Now, here's the funny thing. N95 masks, which not many people are wearing, but they have some effectiveness, but you have to change them every day. Now we're wearing N95 masks that are close to 20 years old, are they? It's 20 years old. They were old when we used them for the fire they had here. I mean, then you needed something to keep that particles from getting in. We were using them then. In fact, our masks are looking, I guess I don't have one right here, but they're all dirty looking. And, we're just following the law so we don't get arrested. We know it's a joke, so we're just putting on our face something to cover it, But now it's become crazy. It's become a fashion statement. People have different designs on it. They have deals where you can see your mouth through it. They have visors. In one restaurant, the guy is making his employees wear one of these dog collars too.
Of course, as well. I mean, police officers as well going around asking people for reasons why they aren't wearing masks, which involves disclosing medical information that should be confidential. And police officers basically taking matters into their own hand and without any medical knowledge deciding whether they deem that person worthy of being excused from wearing a mask.
Exactly. They take it from Bill Gates. He's not a medical expert, and he's
he's now...
he is, but he doesn't do very well because first he was saying how they were absolutely useless, and then suddenly he changed his tune. And in fact, his boss, what is his name? His first initial and last one are AA. He has a boss, and his boss was saying they're useless, and now suddenly they all come to the view because it represents submission. For one thing. And so they want to see what they can get us to do. Next thing, we'll be hopping on one foot or crawling on all four. Yeah. They claim that tall people have more of a chance of getting in than short people because the particles rise or something. That's actually been a crazy thing. Yeah.
I can't believe they actually said that.
I know. I don't know if you have Saturday Night Live or know what that show is. It's like watching Saturday Night Live instead of watching real life on TV.
Yeah, it is.
It was the UK government or something announced that ages ago that wearing masks wasn't necessary. They didn't believe it, and then obviously they did a U-turn on that and made them compulsory. And I think Facebook flagged or flagged it up as false information.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Even though it's the same,
the government twice already and warned, so I'm going light. I think I'm going to do something over on BitChute because I just can't keep quiet about this.
So what happened on Facebook? Did you just get posts removed?
Well, I put something about the vaccinations. That's a no-no. You can't say anything about vaccinations. So somebody either turned me in or they found it or whatever. Yeah. And so I've been saying things on another station I'm interviewed on, and I'm really thinking of starting on BitChute. We opened an account. I just have to figure out what I'm going to say and how to say it. But at this point, I wrote 3 books about it, and actually they're almost outdated now because things have progressed so much. So I think they're good, but those books aren't selling because everybody has a book out about it now in one way or the other. So I'm lost in thousands of people. As Robert Greene pointed out, it's best to pick a subject that no one is into, like mind hacking, which I do.
That's true.
And very few people are, like solar nutrition. But I'm not going to make any money on writing books about COVID, that's for sure. And there are plenty of really good experts. You guys, and I'm so glad to see you here, that you realize that you're being scammed. It's a pandemic.
Definitely.
Well, one thing I've been interested in looking at from the start as well has been the enormously overstated and kind of almost apocalyptic predictions of death. So I know in Neil Ferguson in the UK, the epidemiologist, had to double back because he originally predicted 500,000 deaths in the UK. The reality's been less than a tenth of that. And I don't know if you've seen that there's a big thing in South Africa as well, because the initial projections there were hugely overstated. And they had an extremely strict lockdown as a result of it. You know, they even banned alcohol and tobacco there. Basically, in hindsight, there's a group called PANDA, the Pandemic Data Analysis, who are a bunch of economists, doctors, data scientists, analyze the differences between countries with stricter lockdowns and more relaxed lockdowns and so on. And they found that lockdown measures have been a complete failure at reducing the pace of spread of infection, or they call it the reproduction rate. Because governments assume that each time they relax the measures, there'll be a step up in cases. And the reality is that the reproduction rates just track a descending path anyway. What they call social mobility. So the amount of people coming into contact with each other didn't affect the curve of the virus. They predicted that in the future that in South Africa, the deaths, the lockdown-related deaths will exceed the number of deaths from coronavirus. So, I mean, this is a lack of treatment for things like, I don't know, tuberculosis, diabetes, things like that. And I've got a quote here from the co-founder of Panda, who said, "What has happened in the last 4 months is the greatest social injustice in South Africa's history since apartheid. The lockdown is based on bad science, poor modelling, and even worse judgment on the part of the government."
Also, just
have figured that out. Tanzania, for instance, the president there figured it out. You heard about his test, and he got results out of sending a papaya in, I believe, and several other samples like that. And the president of Madagascar, too, seems to have figured it out, who is very against basically, I think in Tanzania, the president's son got it, and he just gave him, what was it? It's not garlic, it's ginger. He gave him ginger and lemon and a few things like that, and he said that's all that's necessary. And indeed,
they just have 20% in common with a common cold, right? The virus, I think it's something like 20%.
It's like you would treat a cold, and colds are to show how colds are in your head. I've cured colds just immediately in various methods, and I finally figured out it's coming from my head. I read a lot of Gurdjieff at one point, and Gurdjieff said the best way to get rid of disease or like a cold is to say you don't have it. Tell everybody you don't have it. So I had a really bad one. I mean, I'm just draining out of my nose. And I'm in a print shop, and a lady looked at me and said, "Wow, you really have a bad cold there." And I said, "I don't have any cold." And she looked at me like I was a madman. And so I left there still with the cold, and I went over to a health food store I managed. And the owner was there, and he said, "Wow, you really have a bad cold." And I said, "I don't have a cold." Well, he broke into a belly laugh and thought that was so hilarious. He laughed, and my cold completely gone. At that moment that he laughed, no sign at all. I never had a cold after
That's
that.
amazing.
And I've done similar things like that, so I know a lot of this has to do with our immunity and our desire. My teacher, Adonna Lay, called it ATG, attention-getting syndrome, that a lot of times we get sick because we want attention. And when I first heard that term, we went on in Arizona, we went in one of those recreational vehicles, and the son, this couple's son got sick, and he was throwing up and everything, and so he had to keep out of school, so he went with us. And so he kept throwing up and getting sick, and he kept on asking for an aspirin. And we were doing all kinds of health food stuff, including the parents that were into it. So finally, Adonna Lay, who was with us, said to the mother, "Give him one of these." And you know those big throat lozenges you put in for sore throats? Forget the name of it right now. But anyway, tell him it's an aspirin and tell him to swallow it all. So she went and gave him the aspirin, and he took it, and he went right to sleep and just stopped all the throwing up and the complaining and everything. We were driving then for a few hours. He slept all the time. When we got off and woke him up at home, he said, "See, I told you. All I needed was an aspirin."
Placebo effect to the extreme. Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
if anyone ever told him. He's a grown-up man now. He was
Yeah.
about 12 back then. I don't know if anyone ever told him what that aspirin really was.
He might just randomly get sick again if you tell him. You might just,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
I think even in the UK they were estimating more excess cancer deaths than total coronavirus deaths because they've been telling people to obviously to stay away from hospitals. I think I read that something like more than 12,500 cancer diagnosis might have been missed. And in fact, one of my friends from here, his mum was being treated for cancer and it was working, and I think that she was told not to come into hospital anymore.
Ben, I just wanted to add on to what you were saying. In England, there's been so far, I think, about 313,000 deaths overall, just like all-cause mortality. And originally there was like 46,000 of those attributed to COVID. And then they took that down to 41,000 because they'd been attributing anyone who tested positive to COVID to
COVID death.
They'd been attributing it to COVID. Yeah, so even if you died in a car crash, they admitted that this was going on, but they quietly just took off some of those deaths, and they did the same in America as well, where they said, I think there was someone who was at a press conference in America, and she said,
I've forgotten her name, but I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah, and she said, anyone who tests positive and dies is going to be attributed to coronavirus.
I mean, we were talking about the thing. There's a girl from my village. I think she was 18, who I was told she died from coronavirus, and I mean, I later found out that although she did have coronavirus, she had a bunch of pre-existing immune system conditions, and I think she had to have her legs amputated and all of this kind of thing. Obviously, maybe the virus brought on a bunch of other issues that were related to pre-existing conditions. How much can you say it's the virus that's caused the death?
Sometimes the virus could actually save a person's life because it's a counter hormesis, it's called. In other words, you have a counter trauma to work on another trauma. It's well known, or used to be well known, that TB can cure cancer. You give a person TB, or you give them TB and their cancer is gone, particularly on lung cancer. That's in immune textbooks. I first heard it from a holistic therapist, and then I validated it in a standard immune book. And also, you have, I've known many cases where they got misattributed to COVID. You have a famous person there in Britain. He's a Marquet, if I'm pronouncing that correctly even, that has a castle, and he has wives installed in all of his, bungalows around the place that he regularly, he's a rascal apparently with a beard that has all these women. And he was listed, he died of, on the mainstream news, he died of coronavirus. Well, even Wikipedia says he died of cancer. He was dying of cancer.
That's
So
crazy.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And again, here, that same lady, her name escapes me, she said, you don't have to test positive. In fact, many people that tested 3 times, they got a negative. Well, he's got to have it because obviously he has symptoms that they thought. So that's really common. Herman Cain, a man who used to be called a sperminator because he was a wild judge ran for president a couple of times. He was listed as dying of the day he died of coronavirus. Well, guess what? He had in 2006 or 8, way back there, he had stage 4 cancer all over his body. He survived it, but he still had it in his body. And they put him in the hospital. It took him 4 months of oxygen to kill him. And this, I do agree with Ray Peat. They kill people with oxygen. The ventilators are killing people. Unless they give carbon, which is 5% carbon dioxide and 95% oxygen, they're killing people. So once you get them on a ventilator, and they get paid a lot more money, put them on a ventilator, $35,000 instead of $4,000 or $5,000, then you kill them. So again, not only the drugs, but the combination of the drugs and the treatments. And I'm sure I've been in hospitals before. They are the most depressing places. My father could walk in a hospital and pass out. He was so extremely allergic to hospitals. He would pass out by the smell of the hospital. So he couldn't.
I'm like that as well. I have a big blood problem. But I even went to the chiropractor recently with a muscle problem. I think it was in my back, and I had to. The second he started talking about, I think he was talking about cracking.
Just talking about nerves. Or
yeah, on nerves. So I had to go and sit down and get a glass of water. I can't do it.
One of the reasons I didn't become an acupuncturist, because I did study it at one point, was the needles. They used to give me a needle, and I would pass out. And I wouldn't feel fear, but I'd just pass out. So one time I went to give blood, and they stuck the pin in, and I passed out. But I still, through some kind of immense willpower, I just stood there. And the nurse, I heard her in my peripheral vision, because I was high as a kite. She said, "Doctor, this man doesn't have any blood pressure." And so he actually walked up to me, and I've got my eyes closed, and he said, "Are you unconscious?" I said, "Yes." He said,
brilliant.
I recommend, besides all of my books, which I have on solartommy.com, if you haven't heard of Even Illich, he predicted all of this in 1971 and 74 with 3 books. But the main one is Medical Nemesis, one of the most astounding books. It's available for free on the internet. Anyone can read it. And this third is about the transportation industry. Those are the 3 things where they want to control us. With the automatic cars now, and with the medical profession, because it's become a moral issue. You said it back then. And look, now it's a moral issue. You're being immoral because you're killing people if you don't wear a mask, if you don't do this, if you don't lock down, if you don't social distance, if you don't, etc. You're immoral if you don't accept their products.
My brother even told me yesterday he's heard that people who don't wear masks are being called rat lickers.
What?
I don't know where that's come from, but if Elliot says it, he's more in touch with he's more down with the kids than I am, so I believe it.
I saw this picture on the internet, and it was like a poster that was at a bus stop, and it said, "Keep your distance, pass others quickly," and then it said at the end, get this, "Look away when passing other people." So you're not allowed to look at people because it's just too dangerous. Unfortunately.
My partner's mouth just dropped too when you were there.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
To be fair, I know a lot of people that wouldn't complain about that.
Yeah, that's true.
They don't like to look at other people anyway.
Yeah.
Another thing I was going to mention, this is a little bit of a tangent actually, but I was quite interested in the plague outbreak in China recently that came out, because I remember looking at the World Health Organization report on that, to which they'd said it's not high risk. I was interested that in I think it was 2017 that Madagascar had an outbreak of the plague that was 300 cases and 30 deaths. So that's a recent example of a 10% mortality rate, which is enormously higher than the coronavirus. And yet people haven't really even been talking about this recent outbreak in China. I thought that was quite interesting.
In the United States, we've had plague, but in very small amounts. It seems to be associated with certain type of soils, by the way, that attract it. And
I heard a couple of thousand
in this country, particularly Louisiana and places like that. And they don't talk about that. Also, they let TB people walk around without masks before this, and you're much more likely to get TB than you are. I can't say that, but you're not going to have a problem from getting the cold. My idea back in March, I believe, I posted on Facebook, and I got a lot of flack for it. Everybody should come out, get this virus, get it over with, and we can move on from it, because it would all be over. And stay home. Overload the hospitals. hospitals are what are killing people. Even a conservative in the United States, Ron Paul, finally figured that out. That it's the drugs that are killing people, and the treatments and the fear and the mask and everything else have done to make it as, I mean, when people are under stress, here they've got these evictions are coming up, and they keep on postponing it, and the landlords keep on fighting it. No, we're going to get you out beforehand. Lawyers are working for for the landlords who are stuck themselves. They've got rent to pay. So it's basically going to be a financial disaster, maybe even worse than back in the 30s depression. And it may take a year war to solve, unfortunately.
I heard that U.S. unemployment claims jumped up something like 1 million after they stopped the benefits. The lockdown benefits.
40 million. There's 5 million supposedly unemployed here in California, according to what I just read in the local paper.
Right, gosh.
With a pretty good source on that. 5 million people on unemployment.
But this was so interesting. I've learned so much, and it was lovely to meet you as well, Atom.
A pleasure to meet you too.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to follow you on Instagram and Facebook.
All right. I'm there regularly. Usually, I've toned down on COVID, but if you go to One Radio Network too, I often in the comment section, because I don't want to get the other people in trouble. You don't get in trouble for doing this. You're doing a great service to people, by the way, because this thing, I believe when you're greatly outnumbered. One of my favorite books was The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, which I read 3 times.
Yes.
Me too. It's one of my favorite books.
I love it.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that. It was at the end of an interview with Patrick, I think. And did you say you read it out loud to yourself? Yep. Awesome.
I even wrote letters to my friends in Dwarvish runes. I was so into it.
Oh, that's so cool.
Wow.
One of my friends was in crypto school, so I got a 35-foot letter back in the ticker tape.
Oh man, that's cool.
Oh, that's amazing. Atom, do you want to just tell people where they can find your work?
Solartiming.com. I think I have about 45 books on there, and I'm writing more. We have videos too, and there's lots of information on solartiming.com. We also have a pay site for $99, one fee only, where you can go on and get, it's called color recycling, and actually get your exact time to figure out what your real biological time is versus what your clock says, adjusting for daylight saving. It's like a sundial time. Some people make a little too much of that. You don't have to be a physicist to eat on time. But it's for people who want to dabble with that. We have that. There's lots of features on the site. It's $99. You get a password. And I do a lot of blogs on that as well. I think I'm up to 1,000 now or so. And other information, food lists, all kinds of things. But meanwhile, I've got books on everything from acidify or die, which again is an opposite viewpoint. You hear alkalize or die. I've got the other point to balance it out, because really you want to go right down the middle, the razor's edge. And I have books on solar timing, mind hacking, mesmerism, one of my specialities, researching through books from before Mesmer on to now, and amazing cases of how this, not our brain, but our mind, wherever that is, out in the air, according to Rupert Sheldrake, another one of my heroes there living in your area. Anyway, I got a lot of books there. Just go check them out. And I'm always on Facebook, as long as they let me stay there. Serious subject. My motto is, and he mounted his horse and rode off in all directions. So don't expect one subject to stay there for too long. You know, one of the best things for people is pandiculation, if you've heard me talk about it. It's simply the stretch and yawn. Ants do it. Every animal does it. If you find a video on the internet of a pelican doing it, that's very dramatic.
Yeah.
But if a person just gives their maximum stretch, and yawns and stretches, it can actually get rid of edema. I've seen it by simply yawning and stretching, taking their feet, which say they're out like that, they bring them back toward their nose and then tuck them slightly in and yawn and stretch. And I've seen a person with a leg that big go down to normal when doctors said, no way, Jose.
Wow. That's amazing.
So just yawning and stretching is called pandiculation. You'll even find it in Wikipedia. It's basically combining a stretch. I call it the cat pose. Watch a cat yawn and how they stretch at the same time.
Wow.
And that's my best health tip of the day.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Thanks.
Oh,
Brilliant.
well, right, thank you for joining us here on the Mockery Cushion this week. We hope you all enjoyed that. So it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
And goodbye for me.
No,
Oh, yeah. This is good.
no, I don't like this. Can we not, please?
No,
I
it's
don't
not.
like
No,
it.
it's
No,
not.
I'm covering my screen.
Hey, it's not that bad.